Hello, everyone. My name is Mistress Danielle Blunt. I am a professional and lifestyle dominatrix with over 15 years in the industry. And I'm here today with Lord Maria, and I'm super excited for our conversation today about lifestyle femdom. And I would love if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Lord Maria. I am a lifestyle dominatrix and an online content creator. I began my life as a lifestyle dominatrix about, oh my God, it must have been about 8 years ago now, when I adopted a submissive man as a domestic live-in slave. And since then, I've had a variety of types of dom sub configurations that range anywhere from errand slaves to pay pigs to female-led relationships. And my foray into online content creation has been more recent. I've only been doing this for about 3 years. I started online content creation to sort of open up my life and show what's been happening behind the scenes as a lifestyle dom. But since then, I've taken it off to a bunch of different directions, exploring different themes and kinks within the larger umbrella of female domination.
I love that. I love the term that you use that you adopted a submissive. I would love to hear a little bit about. I was reading a little bit about on your website about how someone reached out to you, asking for some sort of like domestic servitude and that you could treat him however you wanted. And I would love to hear a little bit about that story as well as like, like I feel like many women who are on the internet can get approached by a man who is interested in that and they're like, "Oh, fuck off," and like show it to their friends and laugh and like never engage with it. So I'm curious like a little bit about like that seed within you that was like, "Ooh,
Yeah, absolutely. So the backstory behind this was I was on a dating site and this man approached me and he had some sort of copy paste spiel. It was, I'm a submissive male. I'm actually not looking for a romantic relationship or anything sexual. My thing is that I just love serving women and doing chores for them. And I'm currently looking for somebody who would be interested in this. I would run all your errands, I'd clean your home, get your groceries, anything you want. And I'm happy to pay you $500 a month for this and cover the cost of any other expense that comes my way as I'm serving you. And he's like, it's not sexual in the sense that there's no touch, no anything. I just like doing these things for women. And he said, you can be as mean to me as you want or as nice to me as you want. It doesn't matter. And immediately I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. This is exactly for me. I've been not in the world of kink and fetish per se, but I've been very familiar with it. I guess because of my own academic background and my own life experience. I already knew that this thing existed. I didn't have my toes in that pool, but I was already open minded to it. And the idea of having somebody do things for me and I have the how do I say it? I guess the range in terms of what this person expects from me, as far as how I react to them, made it a very easy way to sink myself into this world. So I think for me, a lot of the simplicity of entering this lifestyle probably hinged on the fact that he said you can be as mean to me as you want or nice to me as you want, because this was my first time doing this. And to have somebody in your home all the time and expecting you to play this dominant role or put on a character in your own home while they're there wouldn't have been as interesting to me versus him saying, you can be however you want to be. I just want to do things for you. And so having that flexibility for me to explore that range in terms of wanting to be, maybe I feel like being quiet, I feel like being kind, or I feel like being a total cunt, for me, that was the thing that I think hooked me into this dynamic, this configuration. So I just went and met him. I, for some reason, already knew to take advantage of him financially. I told him that he was going to meet me in a park with my best friend, and he was going to buy us all these gifts and bring us all these things. So he brought me cash, made him buy her this very expensive perfume that she loved, and made him bring me a gift as well. And yeah, we met him and we just did a vibe check, and he was super normal. He also led by giving me his LinkedIn profile, driver's license, so all the things on the front end that showed me that he was willing to take the risk in disclosing his identity, also made me feel very safe. So yeah, so through that, he started just cleaning my home, and then eventually it worked its way into live-in servitude, and here we are.
That's so amazing because I feel like so many of those stories don't go that way with someone who like actually knows how to be a lifestyle submissive. It is like such a skill set, and I feel like both in how he reached out to you as well as like I love the emphasis you put on as nice or as mean as you want, like
Yeah,
allowing you, not like confining you to this dominant archetype that you have
yeah,
to be, right? Like I feel like everyone approaches their dominance and has a relationship with their dominance in such a different way, but like at the end of the day, like we're not always wearing leather, like we're not always like in a super cunty mood, like maybe we want to like get like a nice foot massage and like express gratitude, or like maybe what you do is like never enough. And I feel like being able, it sounds like such a good first experience to be approached with that I don't know, I feel like so many people, and I wonder now about, as like I feel like with your advertising as a lifestyle dom, I feel like you must get even more messages like that, which of like I want to be your live-in submissive, I feel like is like the running joke between all of the doms of the messages that we get all of the time, like hello goddess, I am your number one fan, like I I want to move in with you, I have no disposable income and nothing to offer you, please mommy. And I feel like the like slow build that you're describing in this story is just so lovely, and also so rare as one's like first foray into the scene.
absolutely. And I think one of the biggest surprises for me entering the online world when I started opening up my life and having people that were interested in joining it was how I lucked out getting a sub who was so experienced. He'd been doing it for 20 years prior to meeting me. So he had way more experience than I did, and he just knew what to do. That's not to say that he didn't need training and whatnot to fit my style of domination, and that I didn't bring novel things into his life that made him a better sub going forward. But I could not anticipate the average state of experience and intelligence. And I feel like going into the online world, I stepped into the amateur show. And so I am very thankful that my standard before entering this world where everybody can access you, my standard was really high. And for that reason, I didn't have to go through making too many mistakes in the online world, like opening up too much time and energy to people who simply weren't ready or who don't understand the fundamentals of lifestyle domination. So,
I feel
very
like
unusual.
when you have that like high standard to start out with, it makes the experience of like wading through the shit of online world so much easier. I come from like an old guard background of training in this like lifestyle house where there were 24/7 lifestyle submissives who were there all of the time doing the cleaning, giving massages, and it was like a full like household and like a leather family. And while
Yeah.
it definitely like had some problems, I think largely because it was a house led by a man predominantly.
Mhm.
uh I feel like I learned so much, and seeing the type of devotion and submission that the 24/7 submissives were offering to myself as a mistress in training when I was there, as well as the people who were running the household, it was just like such a beautiful thing that when I started working professionally, so I also started lifestyle. I think is something that we have in common, which I think does make moving into professional, like more professional, like scene-based spaces, it can
Yeah.
be like a little bit more difficult because the standards are so high. And I'm like, wait, like
Yeah.
I don't want to like I'm not interested in your fantasies. Like I'm
Yes.
interested in my fantasies and I'm
Yes.
confused. And of course, like there is like the complexities of like labor and exchange of finances for time.
Mhm.
But I think like at the core having those like fundamental and earlier experiences of like deep devotion and submission just like really, really raised my standards for what I expect in a submissive.
Absolutely, because you think about the entry into becoming, to getting the privilege to be a 24/7 slave in the context in which you're describing that takes years of learning how to be a good sub. How many years does it take to make a Twitter account and DM a dom? You know, like the selection factor alone is going to, it's just a totally different pool of applicants at that point. And so, um, yeah, it sounds like we both had the means through which we could, come into our own as dominants, being surrounded by subs who know how to be lifestyle subs and who truly embody the principles of female domination and female supremacy. And so, yeah, it's just nice to not have to go through those learning curves with subs who don't know what they're doing when you're trying to figure out what it is you're doing.
Totally. And yeah, I definitely, I feel like there's something interesting there too, because I feel like there's like a humbleness of being like the like very experienced submissives that like first came to serve me, like taught me so much about domination. And like, while I was able to like also like improve their lives through like my dominance and my guidance, like I think that's such a beautiful thing, both like for the submissive to be able to give and like work together in that
Yeah.
way and kind of grow together, that I feel like
Yeah.
isn't really seen. And I also feel like there's such a difference. Something that I found as I like all of my relationships are lifestyle DS relationships.
Hmm.
Some of them like move in and out of like professional dynamics, and like
Hmm.
all of them involve financial contribution to my life. Um, but one one thing that I've found is that the people who are interested in a one-off session are like very, very rarely the people who will be serving me long term. And as I've like increased my like hourly minimum for sessions, or now I have like a 6 hour minimum if you want to like engage with me in a lifestyle DS way.
Hmm.
Uh, so that you can get some of that experience, and it's not just about like you send me an email about your desires and I like do a little dance and act it out for you. Like that's
Yeah.
not what dominance feels like to me.
Yeah.
And I think that there's this, it's something that I think about a lot, is the like facade of dominance that is present when you're performing for someone else's pleasure. And I wonder about what your experience is with that, both within some of your more like session-based experiences and in your lifestyle.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like one of the common themes in my content, or at least in my presence on Twitter, is trying to reconfigure or recorrect um, what seems to be a fantasy of many people who watch my content, in that they see my content and they think that lifestyle domination is basically a sub getting a 24/7 session and not paying my hourly rates for it. And there's a few elements of that need to be corrected, in that I feel if you were to put a camera in my home 24/7, you'd probably be skipping through a lot of it, because a lot of it's actually really boring.
Yeah.
Like sending someone to go get my groceries. Sorry, like that's pretty banal. A lot of the days when I have a sub around, I'm ignoring him because I'm working. I'm doing something interesting. I'm not constantly kicking him in the balls or shoving his face in the toilet. Like, of course, there's flashpoints of that throughout the day, but the vast majority of the time, it, it's not that exceptional. And so that's one of the misconceptions that I think subs need to know, because when they see my content, all I'm filming is the snapshots. you know, you get the little bits of really interesting things, but I can assure you, for the 8 to 12 hours that a sub is at my place, it's actually quite quiet. Sometimes I just put him in the closet and that's where he stays because I just don't want to hear him breathing, like and that's actually my version, my favorite brand of servitude. It's one thing that I look for in a sub. Are you able to stay out of my way? I like the ghostly presence. I don't
Yeah,
like subs who are needy, who are bratty, who are constantly trying to pull attention from me, because guess what? If I wanted that much male attention, then I'd just bring my boyfriend over. Like I love the idea of having someone who's just hovering around me, orbiting, just waiting for their opportunity to make my life better. But sometimes that involves them being quiet. I don't want them constantly asking to massage my feet and do this or do that. And
right. And I
um,
feel like, oh,
no,
I
go
feel like
ahead.
there's so much of like the performance of service versus an actually service oriented person is something that I've found. Like the person who like wants to clean your house but like needs to be plugged and in a French maid outfit and like you need to be watching to be like, "Oh, you missed a spot and
Yes.
you're such a bad boy." And I'm like, that's not service to me. That's a set, like that is very clearly a session where I'm facilitating a fantasy of yours. Like for me and like my 24/7 dynamic, like I'm like laying in bed watching TV while my submissive is doing like a manic deep clean of my house, and I come back out after like 6 hours and I'm like, do this again, or
Yeah.
good job, now rub my feet maybe, or bye, go home, or like go run to the store and do X, Y, and Z. And like it's what I find so nice is that with truly service oriented people, that type of service becomes an extension of
Mhm.
the DS relationship. And like when you're talking about like your submissive going to the supermarket and like it being kind of like a mundane task, I think it's like true for an outsider, but like within the context of the DS relationship, I've found that relationship, it really turns it into like an erotic experience and charge. And like, while like I might not be like at home masturbating the whole time, I know that like my submissive, while when they're doing service for me, while they're like out there wearing my collar and like moving through the world as my submissive, is an erotic experience for them the entire time. And that is what I look for in a submissive, who, whether or not my attention is directly on them, that thread of devotion and commitment makes those like mundane and banal tasks to be something other than as like devotion as a way to transform action.
Absolutely, because there is a sexiness in, like, when you step back and you think, okay, you're spending the day running errands for somebody. You could be doing anything with your day, right? There's so many ways you could be spending this day off, or your lunch hour, and here you are running errands like a little bitch for no reason except that you want to please your master. And that in itself, I think, is sexy. I think if humiliation is your thing, that's humiliating in itself, irrespective of whether she's texting you right now and calling you a little bitch for doing this, or whether she plugged you before you scurried away to the grocery store. Just the essence of you devoting your time and energy to somebody for nothing in return, practically speaking, is in itself erotic. And you're 100% right in the sense of wanting to find those subs who find servitude in itself the end goal, not all the little things in between, and that they don't need to be told they're a good boy every single time, and like you don't have to get them going like with texting and erotic words and actions like plugging or putting on panties before they do something. They just want to do it for the sake of doing that, and that in itself is what bonds you erotically. And
Yeah.
that's it's
Yeah, and it feels rare to find, and I feel like so much of the content that you share is so beautiful, highlighting these like intimate moments of your DS dynamic. And but as you were saying, like not every moment is like that. And I think when submission can kind of transform all of those activities, it makes those like more directly sexually humiliating moments even more powerful
Yes.
because you have like done everything on the to-do list that I've given you. And like I have my submissives keep to-do list for me, and it's like checking something off of that list is an erotic moment. And like when my submissive sends me like weekly updates of what they've done for me, even when they're like nowhere in my physical presence, like it turns me on, like knowing that like I'm receiving that kind of care and devotion, and that
Yeah.
like my power is so influential that like regardless of whether or not I'm in the same room as you are thinking about me 24/7. And that's why I love the component of psychological domination feels like such an integral part of lifestyle and like 24/7 DS relationships to me, because you can't be physically present 24/7, nor
Hmm.
like would I ever want to. Like I love my alone time. I love like going out and fucking lovers. I love like doing my own thing. And it honestly like it can make it even hotter knowing that like when I'm out there enjoying like life's sweetest pleasures, like someone is at home toiling away on their computer, like making money for me, or they're working through like an impossible to-do list that is going to take them like months to complete. And I don't know, I think that's really romantic.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something about having, how would I say it, like omnipresence in someone's life, irrespective of whether you are, you know, egging them on through dialogue, through texting or words, or doing something to getting them going, knowing that you hold that power over them, that you can forget about them and they're not forgetting about you. And there's something
Yeah.
so beautiful about that asymmetry. And that's, I think, ultimately what we strive for as a lifestyle dom, that natural asymmetry. The difference in expectations, where I hold very high expectations of my subs, but they can't have expectations of me, right? They can't expect that after they do something, spend a whole day doing mundane tasks for me, that I'm going to turn around and be like, okay, now you get rewarded. Some days that's not going to happen. Some days it will, some days it won't. But that's where psychological domination comes in terms of they can't predict me. And that's where expect that asymmetry in expectations comes in. I have a whole list of expectations for them and they have to uphold them, and but it's not quid pro quo, just like a professional session where there is a clear exchange. There are expectations on each side. I pay you for this, I get this. And the lack of expectations that subs can have from me is what keeps me here in the world of lifestyle domination personally.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a different experience. And I think something I would love to chat about is like the fetishization of lifestyle submission when that is not what people actually want. And I was thinking about this when looking at some of your content and being like, you just must get so many messages from people who have no idea what it means to be a lifestyle submissive. This is just my
Yeah.
assumption.
Yeah.
And like wanting to like, like move in with you, and like I feel like we all get this, and like it's such a fantasy. And then the second that you're like, well, like, meet me in the park and bring me like my friend's favorite perfume, they're like, no, what are you talking about? That's not what I want to do. And it's just like this deranged, uh I mean, I guess it's just a fantasy. It's just a fantasy, but I feel like
Yeah.
many people who fetishize service submission, which is something that I come across a lot, really don't understand the difference between the fantasy and like what it looks like in reality.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a few elements there that are important to point out in the sense of, and I think this cuts across a lot of different kinds of sex work in terms of, for example, the popularity of the girlfriend experience. When you're escorting, men don't want to feel like they are paying for a service. They want it to feel real. And I think that's in some ways the way that the lifestyle fantasy is so popular, because it doesn't feel like it's transactional quid pro quo, right? They want to feel like they actually belong to a dom, that this isn't just a performance, and that they are integrated in her life, versus it being a session. And then the next point I want to make is that I think a lot of them want to, they have an implicit assumption that serving a lifestyle dom is going to save them money, that they're going to get more bang for their buck. They're going to get more domination for less cost, right? Because it's not, you don't have that transaction. Not only does the transaction render it less authentic, but there's a transaction. They think they're going to be spending more if they have to do a proper session. And that's one major misconception. Any of my lifestyle subs will tell you, like, if you want to save money, don't serve Lord Maria in a lifestyle setting. She's expensive, and you don't necessarily get this huge, this big array of constant domination. You're not getting a 12-hour session if you're serving me for 12 hours. You're not. And so I think a lot of subs, yeah, they approach because they want it to feel more real than in a session, and they also don't want to have to spend as much as they would if they're hiring a pro dom. And that's a lot of the time where the fantasy ends really abruptly. you know
I think it's so interesting. I feel like it's also like a very older guard submissive who's like paying for BDSM somehow takes the power away, when I like one of my like most deeply held beliefs about BDSM and power exchange is that, especially in uh like in a place where men still earn so much more than women, like surrendering your cash and your money is one of the most tangible forms of power exchange that you can do in this capitalist society. And when people completely write that off or say that that somehow like dilutes the power dynamic, it makes no sense to me, because laying cash in my hands is single-handedly one of the most powerful things that you can do to increase my power as I move through the world. And I just think so many people take it off of the playing field, or like think it's somehow unrelated to the power dynamics that we're playing with within BDSM and kink dynamics.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, money is a conduit of power. It's one of the most salient conduits of power in our modern society. And another point I think that sort of dovetails off of your argument is that it's precisely because we live in a capitalist society that if you have a skill, you would be stupid to not command money for it. That's how our society works, right? Um, and so, to that effect, this idea that, putting in money into domination, or intertwining money and domination, even in a lifestyle setting, somehow cheapens or decreases the authenticity of it, still doesn't negate the fact that lifestyle doms are rare, and those of us who know what we're doing and love it and want to take the time and energy to incorporate someone into our life, because it does take a lot of time and energy to train someone to fit into our life. Absolutely, we have every right to be commanding some sort of financial compensation for that. Like, I'm sorry, if you're good at something, you are allowed to make money at it. Even if you're not good at it, you can try to make money at it. So yeah, this idea that it cheapens it, those people can miss me with that. You get a lot of those on FetLife, I find, because
Oh
those are
God,
where
I
you.
haven't been on FetLife in years. My FetLife account is dated. Oh man. But yeah, there's so much of that. And you're so right. And it's like that older guard, like on like Maxfish or like FetLife, where they have like these like deeply seated beliefs that Dom should do it, should give all of their attention to like facilitating their desire exclusively. And
Yeah,
then Like, even if you wanted to, like, if you were doing that and you're like, oh, I'm so interested that, like, I'm interested in this, but God forbid you have a desire of your own, like, red flag
Yes.
for them. It's
Yeah.
so interesting. I'm interested in, right, so the I'm interested in talking a little bit about sex work in
Mhm.
general in this capacity of like, so to me it sounds like how you're talking about it is, or actually I guess could you tell me a little bit about how you see the difference between professional domination and lifestyle domination and how you see those fitting into or not an umbrella of sex work?
Yeah, so I say the primary difference between lifestyle domination and professional domination is the extent to which I personally incorporate a sub's own fetishes and interests within our interactions. So I do professional sessions, not that often. I pick and choose based on my interest. And again, that comes back to the fact that I've been a lifestyle dom for so long that it's hard for me to reconfigure my practices around somebody else's fetishes. But I think that is the primary difference when I have somebody that's approaching me that wants a session. I ask them, what are your top five kinks and fetishes? What are you into? What are you seeking from me? And it's very rare that they're like, oh, I just want to do whatever it is that you want to do. No, they have a list, they have a fantasy. And so in that sense, they give me this list and I curate an experience for them. There is absolutely no way in hell a lifestyle sub would ever give me a list of things that he wants me to do for him before he comes over to my place. I am the locus of
He's like bartering with you,
of
like, here's my
interest.
to-do list. He's like, here are my fantasies.
Yeah, exactly. Can we check off this and this and this and this and this and this? Like, absolutely not. And
Master, let's you forgot three items on this list.
yeah, that lifestyle session was a 3 out of 10 because you didn't check off this and this and this. I only got a no. It doesn't work like that. And so, um, it it just yeah. The primary difference is whose interests are we serving. Now, that's not to say that in a professional setting that I'm not also enjoying what I am doing with a sub. And in fact, I pick and choose my sessions based on our interests aligning. That oh, this could be very creative and fun, or I like that this person's into this because I've always wanted to try this or play around with this. And so there are my personal interests are still integrated in theirs, but I'm weaving mine into theirs. Theirs is the baseline. And I'm trying to figure out where I fit in that, whereas it's the diametrical opposite in lifestyle setting. Um, and then in terms of how they both fit into sex work, I mean, obviously, professional domination fits very cleanly into the umbrella of sex work. Lifestyle domination, I think for me, it didn't necessarily, I wouldn't have considered it sex work before I entered the online world. I think because the exchange of money for services was so blurry, it was just an integrated part of our relationship in much the same way that if someone was in a romantic relationship and the man was paying for everything, is that sex work, right? Those lines are always fuzzy. And I think we see the ambiguity in there when for example, sugar babies are explaining that they're not sex workers. And like we see wives who have very wealthy husbands who stay at home, degrading sex workers when in fact a
Getting
lot.
wife bonuses for wearing
Yeah,
clothes.
exactly. So like where do we draw the line between what falls into sex work and not? And it's very blurry because it comes down to gender, power, and money. And so I think lifestyle domination can kind of weave its way into the gray areas of that a little bit. But ever since I entered the online world, then I definitely considered that what I do is sex work. And retrospectively, I can look back at it and be like, oh no, that's sex work coded. Like even if at that time I didn't see it that way, I didn't have a problem with seeing it that way, but it was more like a relationship, I suppose, versus sex work per se, because it didn't feel that way.
Yeah.
But I can see how it sits in that gray, and I don't have a problem conceptualizing it in either side.
I feel like there's so many ways that money mediates relationships too that aren't
Yes.
talked about. And something that I like about sex work is that those conversations are so explicit is something that I really like about financial domination. It's like
Yes.
talking about like the wealthy husband who just pays for everything, or I like keep seeing on TikTok this man who's like who is like, Habibi, you want to be different? Like, send her money. And I'm like, I love those TikToks. Like, I hope he's not just doing it for views, and I hope he's super fucking generous. But
Yeah.
I think it's like there is these there are these like gray areas of different types of relationships, and I definitely think like depending on how you approach lifestyle femdom, I can see it like falling into like a nebulous category. And I think it's also so true that sometimes in retrospect we view our experiences differently. Like I have a very different understanding of my experience training in like a lifestyle old guard leather house like 15 years later than I did when I was like 18 in this space being like, wow, this is the most amazing place I've ever been. Like I'm like lounging in front of a fire on a sheepskin rug drinking like the most beautiful like glass of wine and like being like fed cookies like from like a human platter. And now I'm like, oh, like now analysis of power is like more refined and I'm not just like drunk from like new experience. I
Yes.
have very different thoughts about some of my earlier experiences and my like foray into BDSM.
And so, in what ways, what do you think is the main thread of change that you've experienced and from the time when you were starting to now? Like, let me ask you this. What has been the main thing that has changed, and what has been the thread of continuity through all of it?
Yeah. I think I'll start with a thread of continuity, which is I'm a lifestyle dom. It's like an integral part of my
Yeah.
sexuality. Like the way that I date, the way that I use men, it is like exclusively like of use. Like when I fuck men, they are human dildos being like trained to facilitate my pleasure. I'm also queer, so just like all of my partners are trained to facilitate my pleasure, and acts of service are so important to me because it's something that I saw in the space that I was training so much. And like the level of devotion was really, really intense in that space. But there were also like very real abuses of power and very like and I don't think I had as bad an experience there as other people did. And I don't think it was until I was talking to people who had um worse experiences there that I really started to like re-reflect on some of my experiences. And I think because I um was able to get out of the situation in a
Mhm.
way where it didn't really cause me harm, like I had stable relationships outside of the space. It wasn't able to like subsume me completely,
Yeah.
that I was able to get out like relatively unscathed and like take what worked for me and kind of
Yeah.
like leave the rest, not the best, leave the rest behind and like
Yeah.
not perpetuate those same things in my relationships and my dynamics. And so it definitely had kind of like a totalizing power of the space where they like when the Nexium when the Nexium cult movie came out, people were texting me and were like, "Was this your upstate cult that you were involved
Okay. Okay.
in?" It was a different upstate one, and like
Yeah.
slightly different tactics. So I think like something that I try and be really aware of and move differently is like ensuring that my submissives have relationships where they can talk about our dynamic outside of our dynamic is something that's really
Hmm.
important with me, whether or not it's having like kink community and like going to classes, which I know isn't an option for everyone who are looking for privacy, or for folks who are looking for more privacy, setting them up with like a kink friendly therapist so that
Hmm.
I'm not the only um they have someone to like bounce ideas off of. Like I don't want to be like like I'm not a therapist. I don't want to be responsible for
Yeah.
that. I want people to like work on communication skills and as well as like be able to like advocate for themselves and their needs in
Hmm.
a way that feels like aligned with the relationship. And I felt like that was really missing from my space, as well as I remember one experience I had there where like one of the people in charge of the space was trying to use their DS relationship to get someone to go off of a medication because they thought a natural cure would be better, and it just felt like
Wow.
such an abuse of power
Yeah.
that I try and um try and be like really aware of that, of how much power we hold in
Mhm.
relationships, and wielding it as like ethically as possible, and like being aware that like I can make mistakes and like kind
Yeah.
of learn and growing together, rather than
Yeah.
like kind of like totalitarian type of power where if you like wrong the family, you're totally gone. So like balancing like the eroticism of it with the like very real abuses of power that happen.
I think I love the idea that what you look for in a sub or what you hope for requires that they remain tethered to the kink and fetish community in a way outside of your own power dynamic. Um, I've never thought about it in that way, but one thing that I always look for in a sub is how many of their eggs are in this one basket with me versus do they also have a healthy lifestyle going on with their family, their work? Are they still maintaining the other pillars of their life outside of this dynamic that we have? I find that subs that throw themselves entirely into submission, and this is the thing that's keeping them afloat, like that it's me that's keeping them able to stay focused on their work outside or have healthy relationships with their partners or their kids if they have a family. Super important. I've definitely been in dynamics with subs who really were quite dependent on me to keep them psychologically afloat. And that's a lot of responsibility for a Dom, and it's also not the correct way to maintain your well-being as a sub. And I think there's that line between submission being good for you, being cathartic, being healing, allowing you to explore your identity and these other parts of you that you have to maintain, keep repressed in your vanilla world, but then also not leaning on that as your lifeline. And this idea that you need to have these lifelines outside of your dom is really important. And to your point, I like the point that you made in terms of how much power you can have over a sub and there needing to be these other points of contact for you to be able to, assess that power dynamic is really important because I think as a Dom, especially as a female Dom, we, in general, women, we're two steps ahead of men in terms of emotional intelligence. And I know the power I can wield in terms of being able to fuck with someone's mind. Now, do I do that responsibly? Yes. And do I have enough conscience and maturity in myself to know when I am perhaps stepping outside the boundaries of what's appropriate and what's not? Yes. Have I always stayed within those boundaries? No. But it's there's always this argument between a sub's own agency when it comes to their own well-being and their own responsibility of taking care of themselves, and I fully agree with that. And I in general denounce these instances of online when we put so much responsibility on the dom, like, oh, you can't do that to a sub, like how dare you treat them that way, while negating the fact that like this every sub has the ability to walk away and be like, you know what, this has gone too far, this is not my thing. But by the same token, I can also recognize the power of emotional manipulation, psychological domination, and being able to hook someone into a position where they fully trust you. And there is something to be said about that, even as we can have conversations about a sub's own agency and responsibility in their own well-being. Yeah, just so many different dynamics that are you can unpack that are very interesting to talk about when it comes to power and gender.
Totally. And I think something to I feel like what we're talking about right now is we're talking about risk, and like the risk of
Mm-hmm.
exploring power dynamics in this depth where, right, like you have gotten like someone has asked you to get into their head to control them. They're reciting
Mm-hmm.
mantras of devotion for you. Like every act of their life is an act of submission for you, bringing them like deeper and deeper into your control. I think it's like really important to like remember that power, as well as like wield it responsibly. And I appreciate what you said of like, you know, like you work within it, but like, of course, like we all like learn and grow and we learn from
Mhm.
our mistakes and things that like we might not do again. And, but I
Mhm.
think there's something too, I feel like in a lot of BDSM discourse, so much of the responsibility is placed on the Dom. And while I do
Yeah.
think that like, the Dom has an outsized responsibility because I think like subspace is an incredibly vulnerable space. Top space is as well, but you still have to maintain that like thread for safety. But I think for me a lot of it is about negotiation, talking about risk and control and like I'm like very open with what I'm doing to people's brains. Like I'm not like hiding it. I'm not like I'm giving you this mantra because I want to consume all of your thoughts. Like I want every thought that you have to be of me. I want like when you wake up to know that like I visited you in your sleep and that everything is an act of service for me. It's like I'm not like it's not like subliminal messaging. It's like very blunt, it's very overt. Um but I think too that submissives also have a responsibility in well, I think both doms and submissives have a responsibility for the risk that they're engaging in. And I think for
Yeah.
me, such an important like point of negotiation is talking about like that risk and like what do we do if something goes wrong, because right like especially if you're interested in this like very edgy play like at like pushing someone to the edge and someone is wanting to be pushed to the edge of what they can take, like it's
Yeah.
possible you'll push over that. And I don't think that that's necessarily wrong or an abuse of power if you're both consenting to this risky relationship. And so for me, it's much more like, how do we come back from that and like repair rather
Yeah.
than like need to stop. And of course, anyone can walk away like at any time if something
Yeah.
doesn't work for them. I feel like there's not enough conversations happening in community about risk, and I would like to see a lot more of that because like that's that risky area too is like where I have the most fun and like the people that I play with that have
Mhm.
fun. And in most of the relationships when like it's gone a little bit over it, it's like what do we need to like we'll back off a little bit and like figure out how to like re-regulate.
Yeah, exactly. Because so much of the fantasy that exists within this sphere is being pushed past your edges. That's kind of intrinsic to it. Like some of them, yes, they just like their thing, they like their foot worship, and that's their comfort zone. That's what gets them off. But a lot of them have this catastrophe fetishization, where they want to look back and be like, I can't believe I did that. you know? And that is pushing them outside the bounds of what they agreed upon when they first entered this. And to be able to do that takes a lot of intuition, I think, as a Dom, and a lot of experience and a lot of comfort with taking risk and knowing that, you might fuck this up if you push it too far. And then you might have, you know, some hard conversations to have after that. But um, it's risk is inherent in it, and sometimes it pays off, sometimes it doesn't. For me, I think most of the time it does pay off. Hard to say though, because a lot of the subs who I chat with now are mostly online, so they'll delete their accounts after a certain time, and so there is a place for
Such a hard
conversation.
time with that.
Do you?
Well, just because it's so different than my dynamics in
Yes.
I think in general, like I think people running away from desire, like it's not emotionally hard, but I'm like, what the fuck? Like this is the point. Like when you're about to run away is when something interesting is about to happen. Like it is like
Yes.
on the other side of your fear that your like true desire lies. Like sure, if it's not what you're interested in, sure, but like if you're so afraid because it's hitting into something so core to you and your sexuality that you feel the need to leave, I think it's so sad. That's what makes me sad that I'm like you could like this could have been amazing for you. Like I know like I'm fine, but I'm like just like it makes me sad that people hide from their desire like that in a way that I think like in like lifestyle dynamics isn't as easy to
Yeah.
withdraw from. And I don't know. I think good sex is risky. I think like intimacy is risky. I think
Mm.
that
Yes.
like if you're just operating within what you know in your comfort zone, like that's totally fine, but I don't particularly find that interesting or like a
Yeah.
fun way to play with power.
Yeah, exactly. Because if I'm the same, like I love pushing people past their thresholds. I think that's part of the cat and game thing for me, and I think that's why I'm still here and it's still interesting for me because it is like you have a new person, and yes, it can be very formulaic in terms of once you've been around enough subs, you understand how to push, when to pull back, whatever. But there is still a lot of surprise. And there's a lot of interesting dynamics with every single sub in terms of what is their kink. Okay, how am I going to push this further? How am I going to get them to do things they've never done before? And I think for me, that's at least what keeps me here in the online world because it is a psychological power game. And when they come and they play and then they all of a sudden delete, there's the big unknown in terms of okay, did they hit a shame wall and like they can't believe they've been pushed this far and they don't want to go further? Or did their wife walk in? So just like peace out as quick as they can. Or, what is it? And it kind of leaves that the big question mark. And, we all get used to it because so many of them will
Yeah.
delete. Or is it like, oh, did I harm them? And should there have been a conversation after this? And
Yeah.
you just kind of have to trust that they'll come back if they want to have that conversation. Or maybe they won't. Maybe they're just more insular and not all subs want all that open dialogue or feel like they need it or even know that it's available, to be honest.
I had this one sub on one of my fan sites say to me recently, like it was after a like really like hot online scene, like lots of talk of like hypnosis and like power exchange and control and like I think it was just part of the way I interact with people because of this lifestyle dynamic. It's like such a core part of me. Like I'm interested in understanding people's psyches and their drives and like what motivates them. For me is more interesting than like just jumping into a sexting scene. Like I can give you the most amazing experience, but you have to give me something first. Like you have to like offer me something about yourself because
Yeah.
otherwise it's just like this cookie cutter fantasy fetish and
Yes.
I'm not like a fetish like dispensary and it's not interesting
Yeah.
for me. And he said something to me which was like you I can't remember verbatim, but he was like so into it. I asked him a a like personal question about his like motives and his drives and he and like encouraging him to like go deeper and he's like you expect this level of submission from people and I thought a lot about the comment because it was like implying that I was like going too fast and I'm like no, it's like the people that like I'm most interested in playing with are interested in that and I'm fine with not being appealing to everyone because I'm not interested in what gets you off. Like I'm interested in what gets you off in the capacity that like I can use it to control you further, but like
Mm-hmm.
I'm not just here to like chat with you about your dick. It's I'm
Yeah.
I'm here for like a power exchange. And
Yeah.
if you just want fetish, I've always felt this way about like the distinction between fetish and power to and domination to be such an
Mhm.
interesting differentiation. And I have fetishes. I I clearly love leather. Like I love how fetishes control people. Actually, I have a really fun clip where I like unpack the like Marx's idea of the fetish and just like really like delving deep into it. But like for me, it's like a locus of control. And
Mhm.
I think it was really interesting because this person was so into the conversation and then, withdrew. And I think this skittishness is like really normal. But I also
Mhm.
feel like if you're approaching me, you've done your research. What I've found
Yeah.
about since you find me is that you've done your research and I'm only interested in the people who are interested in serving me rather
Mhm.
than serving some dom. So if you're just interested, like I never have seen, I've been working like almost 15 years. I've never like had the hobbyists. I've never like had the reviews written because like those people don't see me because my
Yeah.
like I think it's a point of privilege. I feel like it's important to say like it feels like a privileged place to be approaching sex work where like I can say no to so much of the
Yeah.
work at this point in my career. Um and like doing things online also is really helpful, but I only see the people that I'm interested in and that I have some point of connection with. And like what I really love is going deeper with people because it's the relationship that I find so interesting, not the activity so much.
Absolutely. And I think I'm assuming that you are going to pull for a different kind of sub than the ones who do just want to be teased, do body tease or these things that fall kind of towards the vanilla end of sex work. Because I've experienced that same thing. I've been pretty lucky because entering the online world, I didn't enter it out of need. I have a career, a lot of education. It was just something I wanted to do because I had extra time over COVID. And I've always had this secret life with all these really interesting dynamics and things that I've always wanted to express and talk about. And so when I created an OnlyFans, like my earlier iterations of OnlyFans, I was writing like long blog posts about power and gender and why I do certain things within this and what this means, but not this. And it's been a minute since I've written a long post like that. That's been semi-retired a little bit, but I'm going to get back into my writing. But um, what I noticed was that because my content is a lot headier and more cerebral, like, yeah, okay, I can look like I'm doing, um, the tease and denial, like body, lips, hair, whatever. I can fit into that just fine. But I think where I stand out or what my niche is actually more the psychological element of it intertwined with the girl next door look. And so I've been when that's your brand, that's what's facing the public, then you're going to pull for people who are also very heady, also want that psychological domination, also want a dom who has really been thinking about the contours of power and can talk about it and can get into their heads and will do a lot of that front end dialogue being trying to figure out who are you, what is
Right.
it that makes you tick. And it's because it's not just going to be like, look at my tits.
Yeah.
It's going to need a lot more than that or different things than that. And so I would imagine for you, because you are also very cerebral and heady and you're very much into the psychological aspect, that you're gonna get the people that are gonna pass through that are like, hurry, just like give me something I can jerk off
Yeah.
to, versus the ones that want to be seen, the ones that want to
Yeah.
be known, the ones that want to feel like you know them better than they know themselves. And that's the beauty of branding, is once you brand yourself that way, you're gonna be pulling in people who are like that versus just the hobbyists and the ones who are like,
Right.
entertain me.
Dance.
Yes,
It-
exactly. Show me that ass.
yeah. I definitely and this person that I'm talking about, I think is interested in that.
Hmm.
It's like this the skittishness of like the fear of being known, I think
Yes.
is omnipresent, and I think that's delightful.
Uh-huh.
Like
Me
if
too.
me knowing you is torture, like that sounds fun. Like let's if being seen is like, and this is what I love so much about humiliation. Like I think like the best humiliation scenes that I've had is like being seen or like seeing someone in a way that they're so humiliated by, they're so ashamed about, and there's no way for them to unsee it after knowing that you
Yeah.
have seen this like deep core part of them, which is why I think it's so much more interesting when you know someone rather than
Yes.
just like, oh, like you have a small dick or like you're a beta. Like I think those things are hot and erotic and like can be
Yeah.
part of it, but like
Yeah.
how much more humiliating is it to be seen for the fact that like you know exactly what you want and you will never get it because you're so fucking pathetic that you will never be able to articulate it and ask for it, and that a
Yeah.
woman like me has to look you and read your mind and know you better than you know yourself
Yes.
in order to get any of your fucking needs met. Like, you're never going to please your wife because you're so obsessed with how little your dick is and some woman saying that to you that like even if your dick was fine, like you're never going to please a woman because you're so self like I don't know, it's just so much more interesting to me when it's like there's this element of like seeing.
Exactly. The context matters. The
Yeah.
context matters because, like you said, there are certain tropes or dialogues that can cleanly apply across all of them, but there's something about getting into the head of a man, like when he says something like, I'm so grateful my wife married me. Like she's so beautiful. Being like, but don't you think she might have doubts about you? Like, to what extent does she feel obligated to stay with you for the kids? Like, do you think she stays up at night and thinks about all the other dicks she could be getting? Like, and she compares you. If you think she's not comparing, she's comparing you. It's like you can just get into the little synapses of their brains, of their insecurities, and it's so much more fun when you have their little confessions that you can use to weave your way into their brains, into
I
their
know. I
minds.
love when they like when you just get them talking and I'm just like, mm-hmm. Keep
Yes.
talking. Like mommy's taking notes and like you
Uh-huh.
are revealing so much more than what you're saying and it's perfect. And like that it's I love that we're like both so interested in this psychological component. It makes it so much more creative and like able to have new experiences in this space because everyone is sure some people are like all the same and want like the same jerk off thing, but I think like when you brand and like people come to you for
Hmm.
the the depth that
Hmm.
you're offering, there's so much room for creativity because
Yes.
everyone's like something that I've been thinking about a lot. I read this book Sexuality Beyond Pleasure and it's about risk and consent
Hmm.
is um but I mean it's about risk and like what we do with it, what we can draw out of it, and what we do with our trauma. And like trauma being like a larger word than just like this horrific thing that happened to
Yeah.
you.
Big
Like
T trauma. Uh-huh.
yeah, like some rupture that
Yeah.
happened that changed who you are at your core. And I think it's so interesting. And I think it's a big part of BDSM play is like what we
Mhm.
do with our trauma and like those root seeds that have changed us for
Mhm.
the rest of our lives, changed our
Yes.
desires, how we approach relationships, how we approach intimacy. And I think it can be such a generative force. And
Mhm.
instead of focusing on like just what trauma does to us, which
Mhm.
I think is definitely like a therapist space, but it's like I think it's such a fun question of like what do we do with like who we are and how do we play with it and how do we use that as raw material to create
Yeah.
a a really interesting and like bespoke relationship that's not just like a cookie cutter one, that's not just like it should look like this because I'm the dom and you're the sub and now
Yeah.
run my foot.
Exactly. And I feel like so many of these fetishes and kinks do come out of these earlier childhood experiences. And I'm not going into the realm of saying like, oh, people who are submissive are just mentally ill and fucked up. Like it goes back to what you were saying in terms of it need not be a major life event, big T trauma, but rather these little experiences that have slowly shaped the way that you think about the world and how you think people will show up for you. And when you can recreate those in a setting, um, it's a really beautiful thing. In some ways, it can be very therapeutic for a sub.
Yeah.
Now, that should not replace other modes of mental health well-being. You can't, goes back to what I was saying in terms of not relying predominantly on a dom for you to work out certain elements, but I think big part of my practice is understanding someone's background, because it's so funny. I make these posts on Twitter a lot, like, tell me, what is your relationship with your mother? Or how many of you had sisters and were dressed up by your sisters as a kid, and tell me if you liked it. Um, Tell me about the girls at school. Did they bully you, and how has that shaped your life? And it's amazing, the continuity and responses between people in terms of what kind of mothers they had or didn't have, or how it just they got aroused when a girl in grade 2 pushed them into the lockers, and for some reason they just since then have not been able to rid themselves of this archetype of the bully girl, as having a hold on them sexually. And when you actually get into the nuances of childhood, and not the big trauma events, but rather just the very nuanced dynamics that existed between them and women or men, you open up so many new pathways, so many new creative pathways in domination. And also, just for your own theoretical purposes, it tells you something about humans. And for me, I'm always interested in these kind of things. I love Jungian theory. I listen to a lot of different kinds of trauma therapists who focus on these kind of things. And so for me, is it just for my own purposes, is intrinsically interesting to
Yeah.
learn about it in this context, and just collect more data points from people. Every sub I talk to, and I learn about their childhood experiences, it's a data point, and it helps enrich my own understanding of the social world.
I've definitely referred to myself as like a data collector and analyst when I talk
Yes.
about my like domination style, because I'm like, you're just like revealing, you're disclosing things that like you don't even know, and like they're gonna come back to like haunt you and like who knows when, but like I'm paying attention and collecting data. My background is also in my undergrad degree is in psychology, so and
Yeah.
I also really am interested in like somatics and trauma therapy, and I think thinking of BDSM as a somatic practice is also so interesting, of like being able to have the embodied experience that you have been obsessing about, and
Yeah.
being well, it's just like what it does to your nervous system to be able to like not have to think, to be like programmed to like fall into this flow state is a
Mhm.
super cathartic experience for people, and like especially in like this like hellscape of a world we live in, where like it's just like constant like trauma coming at you. I think it can be such a gift to know your role, both like as like the dom, and like know how to interact in these relationships, and for a submissive, like being explicitly told and like having those high expectations, because then you know what to do in that space, and you don't have to think. Something one of my submissives says to me all the time is like, I feel so peaceful in your presence because I know exactly how to please you. Like
Mhm.
there's no questioning like if
Mhm.
I'm doing it or not. Like if I'm doing what you say, I don't have to like spend that mental energy on
Mhm.
obsessing about whether or not like I've done a good job or those things. And I think that that's a like a very peaceful feeling.
Yeah, and I think that's the piece of the puzzle that outsiders who are looking in don't understand. For example, my dynamic with my first sub, when all he wanted to do is come over and clean, and they couldn't understand. Well, he doesn't get to touch you. You're not having sex with. I've dated men who are like they could not believe that this man got did not get to have sex with me or anything. That it was just this thing, and I had to explain to them like, for a lot of men in the modern world, the expectations that are placed upon them are to always be in charge, to make all the decisions, to never be wrong, to always have it together. And I'd explain to them, when he comes over, he doesn't have to deal with that. He has his jobs, he has his tasks, and when he's cleaning, he's entering what She Sent Me High has always talked about, the flow state. And that is a state of meditation. That is a state of bliss. Some people would say that's the closest that you can get to heaven, is to actually enter that flow state where you are focused on a single task, and that's what's bringing you pleasure. And to be able to have 2 hours of your day to be in a flow state, just cleaning for the sake of cleaning, that's a gift, and that in itself is worth its weight in gold, beyond getting a hand job from a woman, you know? um, and so I think that's what they don't understand
It's like
because
enlightenment
it's
or a hand job.
exactly, exactly. Like, please, like, let's talk about the hierarchy of needs for a second. You know?
Oh, it's so true. I'm curious, like as we wrap up, I think something that's a little bit different in how we approach femdom is when you talk about your boyfriends and talk about like alpha males, and I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about your relationship with that, with men in that capacity.
Yeah, it's okay. So a lot of men ask, do I date subby men? And the answer is I don't. But what I will say is that the qualities that I look for in my non-submissive partners, so we'll just call them boyfriends for simplicity, is that it almost becomes a horseshoe in terms of what I'm looking for. I like really attentive men. I like
Yeah.
men who center me. I like men who defer to me when it's time for them to defer to me. And my partners, my boyfriends, they're not submissive to me, but they put me on a pedestal where they see me as the center and, you know, the person that they want to please, and they get a lot of pleasure out of that. And so I'd say the fundamental difference is that with a sub, I can push them to any extent. Like there's nothing I can't get from them outside of their very hard limits, which even at some point as the relationship matures and a lot more trust is established, even those hard limits can become soft limits, and they often do. But with my boyfriends, like I want to know there's some sort of intrinsic belief on my part that there's limits to which I can push them. And in fact, I don't have to push. They're just going to be the male presence I want them to be, but that I can't get away with absolutely anything. You know, I want that assurance that like they are steadfast in their hard limits. They love serving me, they love pleasing me, they love orbiting around me and all those things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I can push them like I can push us up. And I want that stability in my
So
relationship.
there's like the commonality of worship, which doesn't
Mhm.
necessitate, I don't think, a power dynamic in the
Yeah,
same way that like so I totally get your horseshoe visuals,
yeah,
like worship
yeah,
dynamic on one side and like
yeah.
less
Exactly. And there's certain things, yeah, it comes down to worship, and there's certain things that are specific to subs, like humiliation, that I wouldn't employ with the person I'm dating. I have no desire to humiliate one of my boyfriends unless I have specific, explicit intentions to eventually turn him into a sub, in which case, yeah, I don't want him as a boyfriend. I've seen him as a sub, and I want to put him in that.
friend to submissive pipeline is very
Yes.
real. It happens. I've had some boyfriends as you describe, and all of them have turned into submissives.
Oh, amazing. And so do you, when you're dating someone, do you preemptively decide which of them are going to do that, or is it just inevitable that they eventually do become your submissives?
I think a few years ago I was more open to who I was dating. Maybe like 8 years ago I was more open, and then I like went on. I don't know. I have a hard time respecting men in that capacity.
Yeah.
Um, and like I like the way that you described it a lot because I don't love the like terminology of alpha men. Like
Yeah.
it seems very much like not reckoning with the power that they maintain in the world is kind of like my association with it.
Yeah.
Um, so when I date, people are usually very submissive to me, and like even if it's not that way on a first date, it is
Hmm.
the second date. Like whether or not it's necessarily what I was looking for, I'm just like it's just it's so natural for me to take control, and I think the people that I'm attracted to and who are attracted to like what I'm flagging for, it just kind of feels very natural. Um, yeah, they're just yeah. I love a like I will say I love a service top is something that I have admiration for. I love a good service top who, but like to me, it's like training someone to be like a human dildo and like a sex doll in a very specific way. Uh,
Hmm.
and so that's what gets me off, is like the compliance. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah.
I think I've grappled a lot with this idea of like this conceptual category of the alpha male. And every time I work it through in my head, um, I come to some sort of even half-assed conclusion that that category isn't sufficient in describing what it is that I want, or even that alpha men exist. Because I think what we see as alpha men are, the ones who are more peacocking. And of course, anybody who's ever um, thought about gender and power that much, or even understanding why people present themselves in certain ways, knows that the more you have to present yourself as alpha, the more you have to loudly proclaim yourself to be an alpha male, the more we know you have those deep seated insecurities and fear of women, which isn't an alpha move. And so when I think about what makes an alpha male to me, are actually, again, back to this horseshoe, like all the same characteristics I look for in a sub. And so um, then I come to this point, I'm like, well, conceptually, is there any use of having this word alpha male? But it's something I still grapple with. I use the word a lot in my content because it helps to create those hierarchies in a very simple way.
It's such a trigger word too.
Yes,
It's very good for SEO. So like I
exactly,
totally get
exactly.
why people use it, but I've always also like grappled with this this idea because it feels, yeah, the peacocking that you're describing like is what I want to tear down, to be like, no, like this is who you really are, and like your need to present yourself in the world this way, like specifically like in like a patriarchal society, like you just like have, I feel like also the self-identified alpha man is
Yes,
a maybe a
it's
different
garbage.
category of is the sub like
It's hot garbage.
exactly. um yeah, I it's definitely so interesting, and I feel like people, especially like some, it's interesting because I really love cuckolding,
Hmm.
but for me it's about like hierarchy
Yes.
within the submissive stratosphere, um,
Yes.
is how I think about it. Like this person has access to me in a different way than you will ever have access to me, uh,
Yeah.
because of like devotion, loyalty, worship, and like different characteristics that you might not
Hmm.
have. Um, but that it, yeah, the alphabet never really made sense to me. But I love your horseshoe analogy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super helpful because it creates a common thread in terms of what I look for in men in general, and there needs to be those similarities across subs and men that I date. But yeah, I just think for me, a true alpha male is someone that need not proclaim he's an alpha male. And the moment that we have to proclaim someone's an alpha male, they're not an alpha male. Of course, like for content and
Like
for
Schrodinger's alpha
whatever.
male. Just like
Yeah, yeah, because it's like there are just those hierarchies that exist between men. And I think like there truly are hierarchies that exist between men, but they're different in terms of how a sub would configure someone versus how men configure each other amongst one another versus how
yes,
women do.
yes, I
The
think
male
such
gaze versus female gaze,
yeah,
like so I think there's a lot of complexities in terms of well, what is an alpha male to a man versus a woman. And for men, I think it's a lot more simplistic. Well, he has a big dick and he's tall and he gets a lot of women. And for me, it's like, yeah, those are nice signals, but the core of it is how does this man treat me? How does he move around me?
right.
And those things actually have little to do with, these external signaling systems. Obviously, those help. And they're great for content, but
Yeah, totally. And the trigger word is like so real. I'm just like thinking
yeah,
of one of my exes who was just like the most beautiful specimen of a man, and like worshipped me, and
yeah,
like I'm still fucking him in the ass and he's like begging to come.
yeah,
I don't know how to have sex in a different way. Uh,
Yeah.
and like so focused on my pleasure. And I feel like, right, I think what I'm hearing from this is like what I think about BDSM too is that any activity can be taken from a different side of a power dynamic, right? Like if I am, and like the assumption that being penetrated is somehow submissive, right? Like I can like fuck a man, like
Hmm.
using him like a human dildo, or I can
Hmm.
fuck him like I I can imagine a scenario where someone is service topping their husband and fucking him in the ass while he's like directing the scene. You know, like it doesn't really matter what the activity is, it matters like what the energy is
Yeah.
in the situation.
Yeah, exactly. And it goes back to these different conceptions in terms of what we consider submissive in much the same way that like a lot of men who are interested in having sex with men, they don't want to, they think penetration is a submitting act, and so they only ever want to be a top and never a bottom, only because they don't want to seem like they're actually gay. And so there's just different ways of like depending on what it is that you consider a submissive act, because like for me, I love bisexual men, and for me, I see them as like men who are openly bi, and whether it is that they love anal play, like they love being bottoms or tops, doesn't matter to me. I mean, that signals an alpha man. That's someone who knows who he is, knows what he likes, and isn't terrified of existing in this world that is still implicitly homophobic. And so this man could, take it in the ass from other men or from me, but to me, I don't lose that. I respect him more for it. And I see him as being a stronger and more powerful man, all because of it. And for the same reason, this horseshoe thing comes into play on the other side, in that I actually find subs not to be weak people, but actually stronger than the general population, because they have the courage to be like, you know what, there's this thing that's part of me. I want to explore it. And to be able to enter that state of vulnerability and introspection and courage to actually go to someone and be like, here's me. And it goes against all the ways that I'm supposed to exist in this world. It's like, that's a power move. It's a power move. And I actually have a lot more respect for submissive men who are exploring that than men who are like, I am not submissive at all. Like, please.
Just like jerking off wildly. Well,
Exactly.
talking about how they are.
Exactly.
But I totally agree with you. And I also think like I think there's so much strength in submission. And I
Yeah.
also like wouldn't want to, I'm not interested in dominating someone who I see as like incredibly weak. Like
Yeah.
that feels incredibly like boring to me and
Mhm.
uninteresting. I like taking power from someone. And if someone is like coming into the space, like not, like already so degraded within
Mhm.
themselves, it just doesn't intellectually stimulate me in a way
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Yeah. I agree. I agree.
Hmm. Well, there's so much to think about, and I was so excited to chat with you about lifestyle, femdom, and 24/7 DS dynamics and service submission because I feel like um there's not a lot of people who don't just advertise as a pro who like I know a lot of pros who like have lifestyle relationships outside of it, but I think
Mhm.
it's really interesting and creative the way that you and like hearing your story about like how you're like, oh, like I've been doing this for a while and then wanted to kind of like share some of it. I think it
Yeah.
really translates in the content and it's really lovely to see.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So if people want to find you, where could they find you?
Mostly on Twitter. If you want to get little pieces of my thoughts and ideas, that's a good starting point. So my @ is Lord Goddess M. My website is lifestylefemdom.com, and that is also a lot of good background information about me, a good intro into who I am. The bulk of my content I post on OnlyFans, onlyfans.com/backslash// Lord Maria. But then I also post full length clips to a lot of different clip sites, like Clips for Sale, I Want Clips, and many vids. But so lots of different ways you can find me. I would say the two primary ways to deep dive into my content is definitely OnlyFans and Twitter.
Amazing. And if you're interested in finding me, you can Google Mistress Blunt because my social media keeps disappearing. So I've just stopped sharing it. But my SEO is strong. So if you Google Mistress Blunt, you can find me, find my fan sites, find my clip sites. And also I post these interviews on my OnlyFans. And then a few weeks later, they're also on YouTube. So feel free to take a look there for more of these conversations. Thank you so much. This was such a lovely conversation.
Thank you so much, Miss Danielle.